Thank you, Kate. I'm really honored to be here, and thank you all for taking time out of your day to spend this time. And hopefully, I'll be able to pass along some things that are useful for you. So, and please feel free to ask your questions. I sometimes feel a little bit like the story I'm going to tell you today is a big percent of the success is just luck and a little bit of trial and error. So I think just to put that out there to start is that nothing works perfectly, and often takes a little bit of resilience on your own and maybe some stubbornness sometimes in the public sector to be someone who innovates and to try to change systems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm Jonathan. I'm the sustainability manager for the City of Lakewood, Colorado. We are a direct suburb of Denver. We're due west of Denver. So if you were ever fly into Denver and headed up into the mountains, you probably drove through Lakewood on your way up there, about 150,000 people. But obviously, as a direct suburb, the fabric of our community is heavily, intertwined with the metro area, with the city and county of Denver and our other suburbs. And then we abut the mountains. So we have a real interesting interface, both in terms of some of the climate threats you might think about in terms of wildfire and those types of issues, but also in kind of the type of housing and the very fabric of our community. We really go from kind of very urban on our eastern edge as you transition from Denver to very rural feeling as you move across the community. We have some areas of kind of your quintessential suburbia, cul-de-sacs, but we have a lot of old, large lots. I mean, it's not it's not weird in Lakewood to be driving on a street on Colfax Avenue, which was, Highway 50 before the interstate. That was the cross-country route. To be going by some rough-looking hotels and motels and pawn shops, to then run into an Audi or a Porsche dealership and turn the corner and be in a neighborhood with a light rail station and horses as well, within view of the tracks of a brand new light rail infrastructure. So we are an interesting place. We are part rural, we are part urban, and our politics and our opinions reflect that spectrum as well. So it's an interesting place to be. We're about as purple as you can get in what has typically been a purple state when it comes to the politics. So although trending in different directions. So that's a little bit about the context in which the story comes from. I'm the sustainability manager. I'm going to start my presentation here and share my screen. And while I do that, I'll just say, currently I manage the function for the city of sustainability, both internally and citywide, and a lot of our regional work and greenhouse gas emissions and all of those types of big challenges. But the time at which this story starts with the Sustainable Neighborhoods program, that was not my role. Hold on, so I got to pause. I can't pat my head and scratch my belly. Wait, I think that was wrong. I can't do two things at once here. Let me.
And Jonathan, one question as you start to present. So we've got folks kind of introducing themselves in the chat. If folks have questions, do you want them, or comments, do you want them to come off mute? Do you want them to add in the chat? How do you want folks to engage?
Throw them in the chat, and then maybe I'll just I'll stop at a couple key spots and we can catch up with those, if that makes sense, and open it up if folks prefer to just vocalize their questions. I like the back and forth that way too.
Okay, sounds good.
And can you see my presentation, everyone? We're good to go? Okay. So when this starts, though, I was a neighborhood planner just a few years out of graduate school. I had control over budgets or a seat at the table where big decisions were made. And so a lot of this comes from an early place in my career, kind of getting the lay of the land, having an idea of what community engagement and city planning we're supposed to look like and should feel like, and then learning really quickly about both the ways it wasn't like that, both sometimes for reasons that seemed like they needed to be changed, and other times because that's just reality of complex systems and how they work. So that's the background to the story, and now I'll move through. So a couple of years into my work at the City of Lakewood, I was doing a lot of planning at neighborhood levels in the community. We had new light rail infrastructure being built. This is around 2010, 2008, 2009. And in particular, where this story really gets off the ground is I was doing a neighborhood plan around the Garrison Station area. This is a smaller neighborhood walk-up station in a pretty established old neighborhood, a lot of those horse properties I mentioned previously. And we had packed rooms of residents. And when this started, there was a lot of anger. They didn't want trains coming through their neighborhood. They were scared of the change. And as you go through, it wasn't my first neighborhood planning process, but like many of the others, they start pretty rough and a little bit intense. And as you kind of build some trust and get to know residents, things start to get a little bit better. And the folks that are really just angry and have like a chip on their shoulder kind of get their stuff out, and you start to find some voices, people that want to come together and create a vision. And there was a lot of really passionate and caring folks in the neighborhood. And having gone through a few planning processes in the past, I had already learned how to correct some mistakes in terms of making sure there was space for the more thoughtful or quieter voices in those meetings to be able to share their thoughts. And we really made some progress, at which point I started learning other lessons about how within our organization, these planning efforts were really viewed. Not that there wasn't desire to respect the desires of the community, but there was a real concern and fear about making commitments to major improvements or things that were going to cost a lot of money, that through a planning process in the community, you couldn't really promise certain things were going to get done. And if you over described what the vision was for certain areas of a neighborhood or a community, that you created a lot of fear and anxiety in other parts of the organization that thought, well, at some point they're going to come and tell us, why haven't we built this, or and it was going to compete with other priorities. And so often what would happen is we would work really hard, and I have a picture up here of like this idea of what 14th Avenue could look like, and but it's not a real place because we couldn't want to draw any real property. So I had to get somebody to draw a hypothetical picture of something that may or may not ever, exist there, and talk about these great ideas. Now, this is, 2008 or 9. So maybe if we did this today, some of the language would change, but a lot of these sustainability themes were there, integrating land use and multimodal transportation and stewardship of the natural environment and sustainable building practices and support an inclusive community. But as you can see, they're really generic, and those numbers, on a different part of that page of the plan just have kind of examples of what that could look like. But there's nothing, so this feels good, right? The neighborhood is seeing a plan that has all these great ideas and really nice language, and they're like, yes, this is what we are envisioning. We love this. We are so excited. At least a lot of the neighborhood now, we're on board. We know this investment's coming. Look at how we could leverage it instead of be scared of it. But yet I know that behind this, there's no teeth. There's nothing that is going to necessarily go back to the city and mean that the next year's budget or even the next 5-year functional plan from the Public Works Department or Parks is actually going to invest in this neighborhood. And that's not necessarily wrong on their part. There's a big city, 150,000 people. This is one little area, and you can't just do a plan and then put yourself at the top of the list. So I'm learning, right, that there's all these competing interests, and it's far more complicated than just, wow, what a bunch of great ideas. Let's write it down and then we'll make it happen in the neighborhood. So I started thinking about, what can we do here? How do you solve this? Because it feels so disingenuous to spend a year in public meetings and build all this and then take it back, get it approved, and then move on to the next project and hope that somewhere else in the city and other departments they'll do something about it. So I started thinking about how we'd ever address the real unique needs of areas of the city if we don't commit real specific and action steps in our plans. And that I'm realizing it's not really the funding. The excuse is always that, we can't put that down in writing because we don't have funding. But really, there's a whole nother layer here, which is, if we create unique standards and ideas for an individual location in the city, we may have to try something new, and that's risky for the folks involved, right? What if it doesn't work out? Those taxpayer dollars, who's going to start yelling and screaming and be on the hook? And also that there's a certain amount of organizational trauma from the squeaky wheels, from the angry, loud voices that have made it so that for the most part, those folks that aren't on the ground and in neighborhoods, those interactions, I mean, I'm sure you're all public employees, and man, when it's my turn to be on the phones in the planning department, like that is the worst. Like nobody wants that shift, that planner of the day shift, or the guy, like it's a real thing. It can be really difficult to field the complaints and the concerns and the questions. And at some point, I think within an organization, I realized there's like this inherent trauma from it that makes it so we don't even hear the people that really have good feedback and great ideas. And I also started realizing that all these emerging sustainable development concepts are great, but part of the risk that's built in here is that we don't really have the expertise in-house to even do these things. That just adds to the risk. So these are great ideas, but how are we going to do it? Because at the time we didn't have a sustainability department. We didn't have, anyone with experience with green building codes or green infrastructure development, or even working on, managing our carbon emissions or any of those things. So what occurred to me was we have a real set of problems here that we're not talking about through the neighborhood plans that are just kind of systemic in terms of our organization. And I wonder if there's ways to solve that. So the next step in that process is, am I just going to be done with this plan and now I'm going to move on to the next one and end up with these same things? Like how could we actually try to implement this? Maybe there's a different way. And so I started wondering if we could foster a different kind of relationship with the neighborhood going forward, because typically, any of you who work with neighborhoods, you hear from neighborhoods when there's a problem. You hear from them if there's a big development that they don't like, or there's some major issue going on. And this is probably the same with every constituent group. And then you work through it and you probably develop some positive relationships, and then you've solved it and you move on. And the next interaction again with that same constituent group is usually when there's another problem. And it seemed to me like there was this gap where you had spent all this time to build trust. How do you keep it going forward? How do you leverage that trust? There's got to be a way to do that. And, all ideas coming into that plan and separately as a city employee working on sustainability issues kind of in the organization, but not in a formal way. I was getting fed all these phone calls coming into the city with people saying, hey, why aren't we doing more? I'm a master gardener and I don't know why the city's not building more community gardens or doing more to help people xeriscape their landscapes. And I don't know, hey, I'm a retired engineer from the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is right here in Lakewood. And how come the city doesn't have any best practices or programs for renewable energy for residents? Why is your permitting process so clunky? You could really make that easier. There's no reason. And so I started to put these pieces together and ask, is there a way we can just leverage all this intelligence that's in our community? Like these people are smart, they're passionate, and they care. But we're scared of giving residents the microphone because of this trauma of the ones that are always angry. But maybe there's a way to create a platform and we can leverage all of this skills and interests and passion. And if we could do that, maybe we could actually test new ideas in a safer way, because if you have a neighborhood group, maybe you have the political will, and if the neighborhood won't come unglued if something goes wrong, if they know their own neighbors were working on it with us. And another layer that I realized plays together was so many of the concerns and issues coming through complaints and through the planning process in different areas of the city that I was working in. We actually did have some resources for them, right? Actually we do have some really amazing folks in our community resources department that have built amazing xeriscape gardens in our public spaces. And when I got them to come into these meetings and give talks about some of the resources out there, either from the city or from other partner organizations in the community, the cooperative extensions from the universities, the botanic gardens, the residents were super appreciative. So I realized there's also all these resources out there that could help them address some of the concerns or topics that they wanted, but they needed help finding those resources, right? And even with grants and things like that, sometimes there are all these things out there, but you have to have your project figured out. You have to, oh, there's a great opportunity. We have a neighborhood grant program for years here that I was administering. And it was like, okay, applications are open, give us your project. And here's the 8 criteria. It has to be on public property. You have to bring some sweat equity. You have to make sure it doesn't just serve an individual. And we expect that a neighborhood or an individual neighbor is going to be able to whip up a grant application and have thought through all of that and just hand it to us. And every year, inevitably, we'd have more money and not enough applications, and we'd be trying to coax them out, even though we had a pile of money to help. Okay, that was a lot. I'm going to go to what happens next, but I'm going to pause for a second. Are there any questions in the chat? as I've set the stage here?
No questions in the chat, people sharing kind of more about their work and where they're coming in from, but we can pause and see if anybody has anything that they want to chime in with, or questions or thoughts on some of the things you shared.
I kind of do, because I'm part of my town's sustainable team, as well as my first degrees in sustainable development and tropical biology. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Paul.
Okay. So I guess my bigger thought is that we focus really more on money. Well, money, but on the economics of, whether it's solar and energy, more than all the things that really make up what is sustainable. And I think when I look at a lot of things here in New Jersey, that's where we're leading towards. We want to change from gasoline to electric. We want to do this. We want to add solar, but we never look at the actual, the environment. And I don't know if that's where you're, like what you're seeing as well, is that, we have the, basically the sustainability of the three circles, and in the middle is your sustainability. But I look at it, all these projects kind of go with one circle or the other, but not the combination.
Yeah, I mean, yes, sustainability is such a broad topic, and I think you'll see here, I'm going to jump into some examples of what happens once we put together a program idea to address some of these issues, is that we see all of the above. Everything you're saying start coming out of the woodwork of people's passions and ideas. And it isn't just, getting people in electric vehicles or just into getting solar panels on their homes, but community building, ecological protection, supporting local economies, all of those things kind of all wrapped together under an umbrella. And that's okay, right? We don't have to pick and choose necessarily, but we do have to understand how, you can't just, EV is a great example, Paul. It is a very important transition, but it's solving one problem. It's not solving all the problems of cars, right? It's still single occupancy vehicles for the most part, right? So it might be great for tailpipe emissions. It might be good because we can green our electrical grid, and we haven't figured out renewable fuels very well other than switching to electric, but it doesn't take cars off the road. It doesn't connect us with people. It's still going to have fatalities from cars. We're still going to have to build parking lots and add lanes and all the other, problems that come along with vehicles. Still, not getting people on, making, bike lane, more bike. It's not going to help us make our roads narrower so we can add bike lanes and better transportation. So yeah, these things are very complex. So let me jump into what happens next. Okay, so we put together a program, and I'll get into the details, but now I'm going to kind of jump ahead and show you outcomes, and I'll go back and tell you, how we got there. So I call this is happening, and this is just I'm going to go through a bunch of slides quick to show you some examples of what started happening in our neighborhood once we took this idea and empowered residents to bring their own passion. So this is the Southern Gables neighborhood, one of our sustainable neighborhoods in the city of Lakewood, who took on energy conservation, and we helped them measure their overall energy consumption as a neighborhood aggregate. So we're not singling anybody out over a couple of years to get a baseline, grab some data from our utility. And then they set some goals and started hosting workshops and educational events and getting resources out to the community, partnering with local hardware stores to teach people how to do energy efficiency, and took that on as one of their projects. In our Morse Park neighborhood, one of their many projects was tree canopy. This is an older neighborhood with a lot of trees that were sick. I saw in one of the registration that forestry and silviculture was the topic. So they took it on themselves to work on tree canopy coverage, and easily blew by their 200 tree goal and have moved on to the 400 or 500 by this point. In our Belmar neighborhood, this is a community garden that was built through the program. And these are the residents that don't have plots, but volunteer to support the garden when people are out of town and help eat the food when there's too much vegetables and the zucchini has overwhelmed everybody. In our Green Mountain neighborhood, those two women in the top left by the dumpster have long had their kids past school age, but they wanted to work on waste and recycling, and noticed every time they drove by their local middle school that the recycling bin was empty and the trash bin was overflowing. and started asking questions and working with the school. Started working with the classrooms, helped get recycling into the school lunchroom. Hard to believe we don't have recycling in our schoolrooms in Colorado, but we are actually horrible at recycling. We are well below the national average as a state. A whole other topic I could do a session on at some point. But and they helped get recycling into that school. And then the model was so successful, they got it into all 5 other schools in their matriculation area. And now the entire Jefferson County School District, separate from the city of Lakewood, there was so much interest, and all the other PTAs and other groups started asking questions. So now they've had to come up with a recycling policy and a whole thing. And if it ends up spreading across the whole district, those 2 women in Green Mountain will have helped 88,000 children have lunchroom recycling. And by the way, they also realized that all those milk cartons were getting thrown out every day, even though they were unopened. So they figured out how to partner with a local food rescue to get those picked up every day and taken to the food pantry instead of being thrown out. That was never their original project. In the Iber neighborhood, this group of women and men got trained to go into the elementary school, which was 98% free and reduced lunch, and a high population of Spanish as a first language, and do literacy tutoring, volunteering in their neighborhood school. This is one of our neighborhoods, Lake Lockwood. It's like a townhome setting, totally different type of neighborhood. So everyone's got basically the same buildings. So they've done a lot of things with their HOA, and this is the group of their neighbors doing emergency response training as a group of their 70 townhomes. Our Southern Gables neighborhood, they're also the ones that were doing energy efficiency. They started leaf collection. We don't have any composting or organics processing in Lakewood. And so they started doing a fall leaf collection. They grew by year till they had teams of volunteers raking senior yards and church groups helping out. And now, all the different, most of the sustainable neighborhoods organize these based on their model. There's another neighborhood, Applewood, who's organized paint recycling. These also then were so successful, they've spread across most of the neighborhoods. In our Iber neighborhood, I'm bouncing around here, but this group of neighbors turned that piece of land into this through the program. They also started a Be Safe program, which has been incredible. These were residents, and this is going to get into kind of the risk factor for a city and how this program's helped. These residents were really concerned about the bee population decline and the use of chemicals on landscape, and had been yelling at the city for years, just a couple people from this neighborhood, about spraying into parks. And the city so scared to change management because we have to take care of noxious weeds and because we have beautiful green grass, and what happens when Canada thistle's in the soccer field. And so the answer was always no, but they said, okay, we're going to do this for our residents and our neighbors. And they started this pledge campaign where people would sign up, learn how to not use any of those chemicals in their yards, put these signs in their yards. That's a big stack of them. And then they would host workshops, work with landscaping companies that used chemical-free maintenance, nurseries that grew plants that didn't have persistent neonicotinoids and other chemicals. And we've now ordered 400 or 500 of these signs over the last few years, and this is spread across most of the neighborhoods as well. And then, by the way, we've also now been able to pilot chemical-free parks in a couple of those neighborhoods because they have the safety and the cover of the residents. Oops, sorry, my lights just turned off behind them. We've got zero waste community events in most of these neighborhoods, clubs forming around walking, biking, running, book clubs around sustainable living. One of our neighborhoods even has a club that's mostly seniors, and they lunch together at local restaurants once a month. They've been doing that for 4 or 5 years. All kinds of workshops, beekeeping, tree care, composting, chicken keeping, you name it, there's been workshops, oftentimes multiple. And during the pandemic, those went virtual and didn't skip a beat, a whole series of virtual workshops. They're solving problems in these neighborhoods. And Weir Gulch Gardens, upset that there's no curbside compost. Residents who are expert composters said, let's start a Compost Buddies program. You sign up, we'll pair you with your nearest neighbor that does composting, and they can bring your scraps and you guys can work together, and they have the whole system and they'll teach you how to do it. You put in some sweat, bring your food waste, we'll get it going, and it's growing across the neighborhood. They're in classrooms. This is back to Green Mountain. Once they went into schools for the recycling, the teachers were so excited about sustainability and the connection to the neighborhood and the city that this teacher, who's on the far right there with the bicycle t-shirt, she asked if we would help teach an elective for an entire 8th grade year. This group of actually 6th, 7th, and 8th graders spent an entire semester rewriting the City of Lakewood sustainability plan chapter by chapter, translating it into language that made sense for kids with their own artwork and their own graphs. And I just have to say, the 2018 Dunstan Middle School Sustainability Plan for Kids is way more useful and a better document than the City of Lakewood Sustainability Plan, because it's so clear and easy to use. So many more things. I could go on and on and on, because seat swaps and cleanups and neighborhood picnics and bike to work stations and art walks. 9 years into this program with 10 neighborhoods in Lakewood, 33,000 participants in these events, and over 800 projects, events, and workshops. And by the way, this is all organized by residents in the neighborhood to realize the vision that they want. So the way this works is residents basically identify what they want to do, and they host workshops, they create the resources, complete projects. They earn credits for this. So we did create a system where it's gamified a little bit. And if they earn enough credits in a year, they become certified as a City of Lakewood sustainable neighborhood, and they get custom signage. I'll talk about the recognition. And then they have to recertify the following year. On the staff side, we really are basically providing a staff person to be an ombudsman, right? We are providing technical advice and coaching, because oftentimes these folks know they want to start a community garden, or they really wish there were organic waste collection, but they don't know what's involved, right? They don't know what the issue is or where the barriers are. And so how can we take these residents from complaint or the problem identification to the solution identification? And we all know that's true. I was reading some of the of your signups, and I know that, like, you hear, people complain. Like, I think it was one of the Department of Education folks, right? Like, how do you get people to believe you can actually make a difference, right? And break through the big challenges and get them to believe there's something. And part of that is that it's so easy to complain, right? We're so good at that. That's why social media is so toxic, right? Like, it's like endorphins, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm upset about that too. And it's so easy to complain, and it's so hard to come up with a solution. Or you think you have a solution, but the world is far more complicated than the solution that you think is there. And that's not a reflection on intellect. It's just that, like, governmental operations have a lot of things, there's a lot of dots to connect. So we're there to help take them from the complaint or their initial idea to build that out into something that's practical and scalable and implementable in their neighborhood. We help them with their communication and outreach infrastructure within their neighborhood, so they can find like-minded folks, understand their resources, know who's there, where their partner orgs are, that they might leverage. We are giving them leadership coaching, and as this has grown, and now we've actually expanded to other, we do leadership retreat on an annual basis with neighborhood leaders, so that we can get them deeper dives into skills. We're connecting them to resources. We're supporting them even with finding them grants, telling them take a shot at it, and then our grant writers are willing to take a look at their drafts and give them pointers and help them out. Really, when it comes down to it, we're helping them navigate the bureaucracy of the City of Lakewood and the other organizations in our sphere, so that they can get the best resources possible. We are not dumping money into these neighborhoods other than really the staff time. Very, very low budget. I'll get there in a second. We don't just open this up at any time to any neighborhood. That would be overwhelming for us to manage. We don't have those resources. And when I started this, I told you I didn't have budget power. So this was all couch cushion change, like begging for a few bucks here and there to get some things printed. We've got a little budget now, but really we wanted to know we had neighborhoods that cared, especially at the beginning, and had some wherewithal and some people interested. So it's a competitive application process that we open up when we have capacity, usually 2 neighborhoods at a time. When we accept them into the neighborhood, into the program, we help them with their communication strategy, getting materials customized, translated into different languages, building their mailing lists, understanding who and how they communicate already. We help them do inventories and surveys of their interests and resources in their neighborhoods, and we help them plan a big neighborhood kickoff to get everyone together, let them know about what's happening. So the staff time we're putting in is very heavy on this upfront part, but then once they're up and running, it's almost self-sufficient to a great extent. And then after they have this big kickoff and they share their interests, they find people, they form teams around projects, so that the people who are interested in gardening aren't worried about also trying to put on energy workshops, and the folks that are interested in fundraising and school supply drives and food drives aren't also trying to do multimodal transportation advocacy or forming bike clubs. You can really get into your lane, but you do as many or as little as you want as a resident volunteer. And we make sure we create space so new ideas always have a chance to come in. We loosely organized this program with some broad goal areas so that we could rein it in when things maybe were a little bit outside the sustainability lens purview. So those are basically projects that advance energy, air, water, land, or people, but it's still very broad, and that people category captures a lot of what gets done. We established 2 levels of certification. If they earned 60 credits in a year, we'd keep supporting them in the program. If they got outstanding, they would get this custom signage and a little bit more recognition. So there is some gamification there, which has been surprisingly effective. We weren't sure if that really would work or not. And basically these credit eligible activities are listed here. The first is we give them a chunk of points for creating an outreach plan, and that's new. That wasn't there originally because we know how important communication is. We built a system so they know who is in charge of posting on social media, who's in charge of the email list, who's in charge of working with us when they need a postcard or a newsletter sent out or something like that. They can earn credits for special events, waste collection days, things like that. Fairs, the art walk, there's a whole, most of the neighborhoods at this point, because they copy each other once there's success, which is a good piece of this, do like garden walks, like where people open their backyards and show how they're doing water-wise landscaping or how they're growing vegetables. Clubs, there's a lot of clubs, and then implementation, the big projects, and we help them understand all the steps and they can get credits along the way. We built out a website as this evolved to help track all these projects, to give them a landing page where they can see what's going on in their neighborhood and how many credits they've earned, and they can see all the details and how to get connected in the calendar. It helps us track so we can collect data and see how many people have participated and all the outcomes, and then share those across all the neighborhoods and track those credits. And it gives them an opportunity to request our help in different ways. They can always pick up the phone because it's that kind of program as well. But it's nice to have this combination of the tracking and the online and the digital tool with the human contact. And I think that is what sets this program apart from some others. I saw the sustainablejersey.com, which is great. But there's a lot of neighborhood level or community level platforms out there that cities are using that allow you to pledge things, right? Like I'm going to sign myself up and I'm going to pledge to take this many alternative, transportation trips, or to sign up for recycling or whatever. But when it's just digital and there's no human-to-human contact, there's something that I think we've found is missing. And this is trying to find that balance point where we use tools to help us, but there's still a human-to-human factor here to help them navigate. So there's a uniqueness, and it can be very specific to their neighborhood. When this started, it was basically like a 0.5 job. And then for a lot of years, as we developed a whole sustainability program and my role changed, we were able to support this up to, I think, our first 5 neighborhoods on basically at 0.5. And basically it was an intern in a few of my hours. At this point, we have a 0.8 FTE supporting those 10 neighborhoods. And we're able to do that. So this is very low overhead as far as staff, if you really think about the impact we're getting, because with 10 neighborhoods and all those projects, we're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars of volunteer hours back each year without even calculating the rest of the impact of all of the things that are being done just from the volunteer time. And then we have, between $10,000 and $20,000 a year that we spend on event support, on mailings, on project supplies, on the custom signage, but it's not a huge budget by any means. There's an example of one of the signs we put up in the neighborhoods. We add years around the outside every year they get certified. So our first 2 certified neighborhoods this year are about to hit the 10-year mark. We're gonna have to figure out how they'll fill that in all the way. That means they've recertified their 100 credits every year for 10 years. So the fact that this has not just petered out after the first couple passionate people got their projects done has actually always catches me off guard. I always keep waiting for these neighborhoods to kind of fizzle out, but it always seems like there's somebody else with another idea. And another, handful of projects to be done, and they just keep coming. And so we recognize them with this signage, a little bit sexier and nicer than, neighborhood watch style. We bring them in front of the mayor and city council and it's like the recertification time, and give them that face time and do a lot of promotions. social media and hold them up. We give them a lot of opportunities for leadership training and speaking and sharing with each other. So it's really a community build moment. There's a ton of resiliency and connection being built here. And of course, lots of different opportunities for awards. So this may all not sound directly applicable to what you all do every day for many of you. So I want to kind of just step back and talk about maybe some of the big tenets that I think are present here that then you might be able to think about how to apply to your challenges if you're trying to kind of break the mold or reimagine the way things are done in your area of where your work is as a public servant. I think this works in a big case because it is coming not from the top down, but from the ground up, but it's not like the ground up without help, right? It's like this really interesting combination where we let things initiate and then we help mold them and then we hand it back to let them finish growing it. So it requires minimum overhead because we're crowdsourcing all of this stuff. And it's coming from the neighborhood, but not, like, oh, you figure it out and you've caused so much disruption, we can't ignore you anymore. Because that's the other grassroots model, right? Like you just become so loud or you create such a disturbance that we can no longer ignore you. We shouldn't have to force people to that point. And so I think this is finding that. So it's neighborhood driven, it's customized, and it's meaningful and it's relevant. It's not just out of the box. Every neighborhood is able to really form this. It creates safe space. And I think this is probably one of the most important pieces of this is that we're creating safe space to share skills and interests. You ever wonder how many good ideas exist, maybe even with your coworkers, or if you do community outreach, like in the neighborhood, but there's just someone who's too nervous to speak up or isn't comfortable public speaking, or, just doesn't have the opportunity at the right moment to share that space. I mean, there was a gentleman, back to that first example I showed you in the neighborhood, in that Garrison Station area plan, who took like meticulous notes every meeting. We didn't ask him to do it. And he would post this like summary to the neighborhood website. He never said a word out loud at any of those meetings. And when we started this program, and they were one of the first 2 neighborhoods, it turned out that his path, he was really excited about the light rail because there was going to be a new bike route along the light rail that connected his neighborhood to downtown Denver in 12 and a half minutes by train or on a 25-minute bike ride, all grade separated in way. And he was so excited about that. His projects were all bike related. He created a map of how to use the light rail and the bike system, how to go to Rockies games. And he bought a bunch of season tickets and offered them to people in the neighborhood. And he would, if they would take public transit or bike and then write something for the blog he started, right? And this guy never would stand up and talk in front of anybody. So there's this like, what could you do if you actually create a safe operating space, whether that's in your organization or somewhere else, where people don't have to worry about failing or worry about being judged, and they can just share their interests, and it's like a safe place, gives them credibility. The staff support keeps things going. That's really helpful, right? Helps people think things through. The neighborhood benefits and leadership development have been amazing, right? A real shift in some of these neighborhood organizations that were already there in terms of who was participating, the makeup, as opposed to being a reactionary kind of protectionist, being, wanting to do positive things. And we've actually now, in the last election, had numbers 2 and number 3 new city councilors. That first one already had happened a few years ago, that got involved with city stuff through the Sustainable Neighborhoods program, and then started putting the puzzle together, realizing how much could be done at a local level, and are now on our city council. So there's a lot of leadership opportunities. Obviously, it's building a ton of social capital and community resilience, and there's a lot of recognition and pride. We were shocked at how important the signage and the credits and all that were. There's a lot of friendly competition. This is beneficial to this organization and the staff in a lot of ways, as you can imagine. It's an implementation tool. We're filling gaps that we didn't have in terms of our expertise. Instead of saying no to all the requests and the complaints, we turn it around, we say, well, that's a great idea. What would it take to get that done? Could you do that? How could we help you do that? That's a great idea. We love it. And that's a different type of relationship. It's positive interactions. It's great relationships. The first meeting, back to that story of the station area planning around Garrison, the first meeting I had police there were people telling me that they were going to stand on their property with guns if, when that light rail opened. And if we changed their zoning or there was any new development, there was going to be violence. And by the time the Sustainable Neighborhoods program was in that neighborhood, I'm turning down glasses of wine in living rooms as people are, coming up with ideas and talking about building their, tool sharing library for the completely different interaction with the same neighborhood organization, right? Who's speaking for these neighbors. It's a laboratory for trying new things. It's okay if we fail. We've had plenty of projects that didn't become something that other neighborhoods replicated, that were like one and done. It was kind of good, didn't have a huge impact, kind of went away, and that's okay. It leverages existing programs, and unintended, really awesome outcome is that we've now got this incredible base of support for solving complex problems. I think a lot of you who work through these, with the public and whatever your interface is people, things are complex. It is not like, if you do this, then this happens. It's like, if you do this, these 14 other things are also going to change. And if those 14 things change, we have to get all those different entities on. I mean, you know how it goes. There's so many dots to connect, and you need a good audience for that. That's not something you can distill in a social media post or in a quick meeting. So beyond all of this energy, we've actually got a community base that is like engaged enough and can come and help us think through these big things to solve problems. And at the top of the organization, this was a real home run because it was positive outcomes. It gave them positive talking points, the elected officials. In that picture on the left from a city council meeting when we were recognizing folks, there's two people in that picture I will name that didn't vote for our sustainability plan. We're always naysayers, but they loved this program. It was all citizen driven. This was like a unifier. They could really point to this. It came from the neighborhoods. Lots of outcomes, not much costs, a little friendly competition between wards and counselors for what was happening in the neighborhoods. And so with all of that, I also want to just take a moment, and we'll pause for questions here in a second, to tell you that this is not a perfect program by any means, and it's not a perfect solution. That picture on the left reflects the majority of the leaders in these neighborhoods in terms of who's behind most of the projects. It's predominantly homeowners. It's very much affluent retirees that have the time and the passion to do this. And we've been working really hard to get more diversity. A lot of their projects that they're coming up with might serve underserved communities because these people care a lot. You saw like the literacy tutoring example. There's tons of food drives and coat drives, and during the pandemic, it was unbelievable. I mean, little free libraries being turned into food pantries, and these neighborhoods did tons of stuff. But the actual folks in the leadership role, rolling up their sleeves to organize stuff, is definitely not representative of the diversity of our community as a whole, both in terms of ethnicity, but also socioeconomic background. So we know there's some major blind spots there that we need to figure out. And we have struggled with that a little bit because this is such a self-determined program that, we think that a lot of its success, I guess, a lot of the design was don't tell them to do anything, just be there to support it. And so we're always trying to figure out how to encourage and provide resources without requiring neighborhoods to take certain actions. And so we're really working through that. And we've actually got a grant right now that is really focused on getting everything we're doing translated into multiple languages, on figuring out best practices when we launch new neighborhoods to really make sure we're engaging the right folks, and creating playbooks, basically going back through all of the successful programs and projects that have been done, putting an equity and a diversity and inclusion lens on it, and adjusting how you would do it, even though they've already been successful, to make them more inclusive. So we're hoping that'll be a big step, but we have really, I'd give ourselves a big F on that so far, if I'm being real honest with myself. And then another challenge that we've really struggled with is finding the balance between action and activism. And this is a government program. We're helping send out newsletters, and there's always these moments when it's like, oh, that's kind of political action. That's not just like building a garden. And how do we help how do we navigate that so we don't put the whole program at risk? So that's a constant challenge that we've dealt with. We've had a ton of success. We've won a lot of recognition and awards. We've helped City County Denver launch this model, and the city of Fort Collins and the city of Wheat Ridge. So one of our big challenges now is that we've created this nonprofit umbrella because it's a lot to help manage. And we're excited. There's a lot of opportunity, right, for all these neighborhoods now and all these different cities to share what's working, right, and all the great success stories and best practices. And all these communities, particularly in the equity, inclusivity and diversity areas, are, we're learning from each other, especially Denver and Fort Collins have done so much great work in that. So they're really helping bring that forward. But it's also a big lift for a bunch of local government employees to find time to start a nonprofit and make it work. So that's a big piece, but we've expanded and we get tons of inquiries from around the country. So maybe, we'll see where this goes. We can help other cities replicate this model. And I'll leave with these last few takeaways, and I'd love to open up to questions. And if you have other examples of problems, I can help you brainstorm too. I'm willing to do that. The big takeaways are we really created this so we can leverage skills and expertise and have meaningful, legitimate engagement. And I know a lot of you probably struggle with engagement because you have to check a box that you did it versus engagement that has a reason, that's going to have an outcome, that's going to give people something to do and make them feel like they're actually heard and that their needs are actually met. It creates unique, customized projects that address specific needs. It's not out of the box. It's not just, here's some resources for you if you'd like. It integrates and catalyzes participation in existing programs. And I meant to say this back to the organizational benefits. The relationships I have across the organization because of this program, I can't undersell those. I mean, the value of the fact that because we have this program, we're constantly going to other departments saying, hey, we have residents interested in this or that. Do you have resources? Can you come be a speaker? Can you connect us? Has really been a unifier for us across the city organization. So integrating our existing programming, helping the other departments solve problems. Now, at first, we were a pain, right? Like, oh, if the Jonathan Sustainable Neighborhood Program want us to do something different. Now, when they get complaints, they come to us, go, hey, sustainable neighborhood groups where we could try to solve this problem, right? Like now we're a resource because we've created an adaptive operating system that allows the city to try new things. And so now we have value that way. And that's that last piece, advancing our goals and plans by creating a safe space for the residents, for employees to use the program to try new things, and to feel good about it, right? It's like there's momentum there. And once even if you fail, like you did it through that program, so we learned, it's like, oh, we learned a lesson and we tried, and that's okay. It's almost part of the story and it's embraced. So that's really been valuable. So I've been talking for like an hour. I'm gonna take a sip of water. I'd love to answer any questions, get feedback, other ideas as well.